I'm not hearing a solution to your problem. How are you going to save our kids from this terrible environment?
Hold on. Bide my time. And wait.
Wait for what? What are you waiting for?
For the cancer to come back.
Hey everybody, and thank you for watching another video. My name is Merge, and welcome to the Breaking Bad What If series that I call the Heisenverse, a series where I make a change somewhere in the Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul timeline and see how that one change ripples throughout the entire universe. And in this video, we explore how the series would have turned out if the fight between Walter and Skyler during the episode Ozymandias turned deadly. How would the series have concluded with such a dark turn? Well, that's what we're here to find out. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. Now, let's get into it. As Skyler drives Holly and Walter Jr. home, while trying to get Jr. to put his seatbelt on, they see an old pickup truck parked in their driveway. And as they go to park behind the mystery vehicle, they spot a disheveled Walter White coming out of the house carrying suitcases to throw in the back of the truck. And Jr. tries to get some answers from his dad regarding the accusations of him being a drug dealer, but Walter just deflects the questions by bringing him inside and telling him that he needs to pack, both him and Skyler. But when Skyler enters the house and puts Holly down in her crib, she questions why and how Walter's even here right now, especially considering that according to Marie, Hank is supposed to have him in custody and they all know that he wouldn't just let Walter go. So while he slowly walks towards Skyler with a look of desperation on his face, he whispers to her that he has $11 million in cash and they can leave right now and have a fresh start. But as she looks him in the eyes, Skyler slowly comes to the realization that Walter killed Hank and involuntarily says it out loud. And when Walter's unable to respond to the accusations, she says it again, but this time loud enough for Jr. to hear. You killed Hank. And this news puts Jr. in further shock because not only is his mom and Aunt Marie telling him that his father is a drug dealer, but now he overhears that his Uncle Hank is dead and he's the one who killed him, which has him asking questions in broken sentences saying, wait, Uncle Hank is dead? No, that can't be true, that can't be. But Walter, who refuses to even hear these accusations any longer, starts to yell and regain control of the conversation. No, I tried to save him. And his look of desperation turns into a look of panic as he stands between his son and his wife deflecting their questions, and he insists that everything is fine, but they need to leave right now. And he walks down the hallway to get more bags with Walter Jr. following closely behind him trying to get a straight answer. But everything he says just gets brushed off by his father as he frantically packs, all while Skyler eyeballs a knife set in the kitchen. And when Walter comes back out into the living room carrying more suitcases, Skyler, now armed with the kitchen knife, holds Jr. behind her and she demands that Walter gets out now. But Walter, seeing the knife in her hand, he doesn't take her seriously at all, and he calmly drops the bags at his feet and he tries to talk her down as he walks towards her. But Skyler shuts him up in the middle of his explanation, telling him not to say another word and just to get out. But when Walter goes to advance despite her warnings, Skyler swings the knife, cutting him on the palm of the hand and leaving Walter in complete shock for a moment. But seconds later, a fight breaks out between the couple for control over the knife, knocking down pictures on the wall and even decorative plates before tumbling to the ground. And Skyler yells and scratches at him with her free hand to try to get him off her, but Walter, unfazed by her attacks, goes to bite her, causing her to release the grip on the knife and having him regain the upper hand. But as soon as Walter has Skyler pinned to the ground, Walter Jr. comes up from behind him, pulling Walter off his mom. But in their struggle, while rolling off Skyler, Walter, with the knife in his hand, accidentally swings it, slicing her throat and having her quickly grab her neck wound as the blood pours through her fingers. And Walter's able to quickly stand up, now literally fuming with frustration, between the baby crying in the background and now seeing his wife gasping for air while Jr. tries to stop the bleeding. And Walter would angrily say, talking down to his son, "What the hell is wrong with you? Look at what you made me do!" Being more angry at the fact that Jr. got in the way and caused him to make this mistake rather than tending to his wife right now. But Jr. pretends that he didn't hear what his father just said as he goes to pull out his phone to call the cops. And Walter, who's still angry and upset, manages to calm down enough to know that he needs to get out of there. So while Jr. is occupied with Skyler and being on the phone with the police, Walter's able to take Holly and make his escape, leaving Skyler for dead and his son to wait by her side until the police come. And with every breath that she tries to take, blood now starts coming out of her mouth and causing her to choke. And Jr. says to his mom while cradling her in his arms, Hold on, Mom, you're gonna be okay." But Skyler, looking up at Jr., uses the last bit of strength that she has to put her hand on his face, and he grabs her hand, holding it close to the side of his head, giving her a smile of hope. But in the blink of an eye, he watches as the life leaves his mother's body and her hand drops. A few hours later, we pick up with Walter changing Holly at a rest stop, and with it just him and his infant daughter around, he's managed to compartmentalize everything that's happened with Skyler and Hank as he does baby talk with Holly. But when she cries out for her mom, Walter's reminded of how he left Skyler bleeding out in the living room, and it fills him with guilt and shame as he pulls Holly in for a hug, trying to soothe her, but she just continues to call out for her mom. And her crying has Walter becoming increasingly nervous, not only because he doesn't know if Holly's going to have a mom after the day, but because this wasn't the plan. I mean, yeah, he can admit that Jesse and Hank got the better of him, and he was prepared to drag out the court case to run out the clock. But when Jack and his crew came in the picture when Walter told him not to, he lost Hank, his life's work, and at this point, what can he say to justify all that he's done? But in his mind, everything that he's doing is still for his family, and he decides to make a call knowing that the police will likely be listening in, and he'd be able to take full responsibility for his meth empire, and leaving Skyler as nothing more than a blameless victim in all this. So once Walter has Holly back in her car seat, he stands outside breathing in the cool New Mexico air, and he slowly dials his home number until the phone begins to ring, and he waits for an answer on the other end. Over at the White residence, the house is now filled with police officers gathering any information they could to build a profile on the missing infant Holly White. And after the coroners remove Skyler's body from the home, Walter Jr. sits on the couch still wearing the same blood-soaked clothes from earlier. And while Marie tries to comfort him, he just has nothing to say. All he can think of is the fight that happened between his mom and his dad, now wondering to himself that if he never intervened, maybe she'd still be alive. A thought that brings tears to his eyes and causing him to break down. But in the middle of all the commotion, the house phone begins to ring, bringing the room to a deafening silence. And as the call goes to voicemail, Walter's voice can be heard on the answering machine saying,
Skyler, it's me. Pick up.
And to his surprise, when the phone is answered, Maria's on the other end and she doesn't hold back on Walter saying, "You poisonous two-faced bastard, where's Hank? And how could you do this to your family, to your wife, to your son?" "Marie, this has nothing to do with you. Just put Skyler on the phone," Walter says in a matter-of-fact tone, brushing off Marie's insults. "I'm sorry, did you say this has nothing to do with me? My husband missing and you killing my sister has nothing to do with me? How dare you?" Marie says, snapping back at Walter and leaving him lost for words as she continues to scold him. "You spineless coward, and you take my niece with you, putting her in harm's way? For what? So you're not alone? She, like everyone else, would know exactly the kind of monster you are. It's just a matter of time. So why don't you just save whatever dignity you have left and just turn yourself in?" And Walter remains quiet on the line, just taking in everything that he was just told. And while Marie waits for a response, right as she's about to open her mouth again, Walter explodes on her saying, "Save whatever dignity I have left? And this is coming from the kleptomaniac who steals spoons from open house events? Please, don't even get me started, Marie. And Holly is fine. I'm her father. She's as safe as she'll ever be. And what happened with Skyler? What happened with Skyler was an accident. I'm sure Junior didn't mean." "You are not blaming Flint for what you did to Skyler. I refuse to let you do that," Marie says, sternly cutting off Walter as she glances over to Junior, who's listening in from the couch to the speakerphone conversation. And hearing his dad trying to pin what happened to his mom on him has got to be one of the most heartbreaking things he could have ever heard. But he once again tries to pretend that he didn't hear as he continues listening in. "Well, I just need to know. Where's Hank and Steve?" Marie questions. And Walter is slow to speak, holding back his emotions about Skyler's death. But he says in a cold tone, "You're never going to see Hank again. And Holly's going to be just fine with me. You just take care of Junior. Goodbye, Marie." Walter says before hanging up the phone and taking out the battery, now finally able to let out his emotions for everything that he's lost today. And as he looks through the car window at the now sleeping Holly, he has a pained look on his face knowing what he has to do next. And before he gets back into the truck, he makes one more phone call, pulling out the vacuum repair card that he got from Saul. It's been over 2 months since Walter went on the road with Holly, and in that time there's been non-stop search parties, 24-hour news broadcasts, and a nationwide manhunt, not only looking for Holly, but also Walter, Saul, and Jesse. But so far, there hasn't been any leads. All that anyone suspects is that at least one of them can't be too far away, given that there's still blue meth on the streets. But little does anyone know, Jesse's still out there cooking for Jack and living in a concrete hole. But for the past few months, when it comes to Marie Schrader, her way of coping is just to stay busy, because if she's busy enough, she can't allow herself to feel the pain of losing both her husband and sister in the same day. So although she comes off looking like a pillar of strength to the community by taking the lead on the non-stop search parties, behind closed doors, her sanity's barely holding on by a thread. From Junior completely shutting her out, to having the hopes of Holly being the only thing that keeps her motivated to keep looking. Because if she finds Holly, she finds Walter, and she can be able to do the one thing that Hank couldn't do, and that's bring him to justice. But unlike Marie, Walter Jr. is not a fan of the cameras and having that kind of attention while he's grieving. And with his father's last words constantly echoing in his head about how it's his fault for his mother's death, the guilt pushes him to experimenting with drugs while Marie's gone to stop the voices. And his drug of choice just so happens to be his father's greatest creation. So while Junior puts on the facade of a moody teenager in Marie's presence, while she's off on her search parties, that's when he lights up. And with Marie on her way home with a few agents after pulling an all-nighter, she starts to get concerned when she hasn't heard back from Walter Jr. for the past 2 days. But hoping that it's just teen angst, she tries not to worry too much and give him his space. But when she gets home, she is shocked to find Walter Jr. in the backyard by himself with the glass pipe, drugs, and alcohol in front of him. And at the same time he sees her, his reaction is not to hide it, but just to get up needing to vomit and barely making it to the pool before saying in a slurred tone, "Hey, Marie, that was there when I got here," Junior says, gesturing to the alcohol on the table. But instead of going to comfort her nephew or even yell at him right now, she just looks at him, not with anger or disgust, but just with a blank expression as she calmly goes back into the house without even saying a word. And when she makes it into her room, she passes by the family photos on her dresser before grabbing the pillow to yell into it and losing that much more of her sanity. Because her coming home to find the only other family member she has left sprung out on drugs, the very thing that destroyed her family, it has her at the end of her rope, because she's just tired of being strong all the time and tired of pretending that everything's okay when it's not. And she looks up at the framed photo of her and Hank, and it causes her to finally feel the loss that she suffered. Hank, Skyler, Holly, Steve, all gone, taken away by her monstrous brother-in-law. And in a moment of weakness, she goes into the drawer where Hank kept his pistol, and she just holds the cold steel close to her skin. And as her eyes get watery, she looks over at the family pictures one last time before saying to herself, "I'm sorry," and she pulls the trigger. And as Walter Jr. is still vomiting in the pool, when he hears the loud bang coming from inside the house, it catches him off guard and causes him to go and investigate what's going on. And when he walks into Marie's room, he sees nothing but blood all over the walls and bed. And normally seeing something like this would have anyone trembling with horror at the gruesome scene. But Walter Jr. in his current state, being high out of his mind, he just looks at his aunt's body, numb to the familiar feeling of losing a loved one. And just like he's done in the month before with his mother, he pulls out the phone to call the police to report the shooting. And while that's going on the other side of the country, Walter, who just put Holly to sleep, sits near the fireplace inside the cabin awaiting his monthly visit from Ed. And since being on the run, a day hasn't gone by where he's not plagued with grief and remorse for what he's done to his family. And recognizing that this is not a life for a child, during Ed's visit, similar to the original, him and Walter have a conversation talking about the day that his cancer catches up with him, and when that day comes, what's going to happen to Holly. And Walter would ask, "If one of these days you come up here and I'm dead, would you take her and the money to my family?" Which Ed says while cutting the cards, "When or if that day comes, I can promise you that your daughter will be safe." "And the money?" Walter questions. And Ed responds, now dealing the cards, "There's a price for everything, Mr. Lambert. What is her safety worth to you?" And there's a moment of silence between the two before Ed says, "You want to go first?" With Walter declining. So a few hours after Ed leaves, Walter's awakened by his wedding ring slipping off his finger, and while fixing it into a necklace, he stands over Holly, who's sleeping in her crib, and while touching the side of her face, he decides that he's done running and is ready to accept the consequences for his actions. But before he gives himself up, he goes to make one last attempt to at least get some of his money to Junior. So when the morning comes, Walter gets Holly all bundled up for the 8-mile trek into town, and he carries her along with a paper wrap box full of money. And when he finally makes it to the bar, he sits Holly down to request change for a $5 to use the payphone. He then offers a $50 bill for the bartender in exchange for a favor. But when a call is made to the JP Wynn High School, Walter finds out that Junior hasn't been going to school for the past month, and he's actually on the verge of being kicked out despite the fact that he only has a few weeks left until he graduates. He then reaches out to Marie, but the call goes straight to voicemail, and for a moment he contemplates about leaving a message, but he wouldn't even know what to say, and he decides against it. And as he fishes for more quarters in the glass cup above the payphone, he makes one last call to the DEA to finally give himself up. And after he drops the phone line, he then slowly walks back towards the bar to order a drink and wait for the police to come. But when he catches Gretchen and Elliot on the news publicly disowning him, it sparks a fire inside Walter that allows him to come up with a plan where he can get them to give Walter Jr. the money. So as he keeps listening until he hears the sirens approaching in the distance, the last thing he hears will be a surprise that stops him in his tracks, and that's hearing that the blue sky meth that he's known for is still moving on the streets, which can only mean that Jack is somehow still using Jesse to cook from. So as Walter gets ready to leave out the back entrance of the bar, similar to Mike, he hesitates before leaving Holly behind, but he knows that this would keep the police off his trail as they'll start looking for him in New Hampshire. So after Walter's able to secure a ride back into Albuquerque, when the police leave the area, Walter starts a nearly 30-hour drive back into town, but first making a pit stop at his old colleague's house. We pick up in a hospital waiting room where Walter Jr. sits alone waiting for an update from the doctors about Marie, because even though she tried to take her own life, the shot turned out not to be fatal. So while she continues to be operated on, Walter Jr. just doesn't know how he's supposed to feel about all this. He's already stopped going to school in favor of doing drugs throughout the day, and when he's sober, confronting his reality is something that puts him in a crippling depression, having him unable to get out of bed sometimes. And now, on top of all that, he finds out that his Aunt Marie, the only member of his family he has left, is ready to just give up on life and leave him alone in the world. And it upsets him that every adult he's ever had in his life is either dead, wants to be dead, or is dead to him, leaving Junior angry and directionless, because who does he depend on now? And in his frustration, he leaves the hospital to go for a drive. To where? He doesn't even know. We pick up a few days later inside a cafe where Todd meets with Lydia, and they touch base about their operation before being interrupted by a more grizzled Walter White, and he purposely plays up his cancer to make him think that he's an easy target. And after explaining that he's found a new way to cook meth without methylamine, Lydia seemingly jumps at the opportunity, but she only agrees to Walter's offer because she now sees him as a loose end that she needs to get rid of. So after agreeing to meet later on at Jack's compound, she explains to Todd that they'd be doing him a favor by putting him out of his misery. and as she dumps the stevia packet into her tea, she basically signs her death certificate by unknowingly ingesting ricin. And for the rest of the day, Walter listens to a police scanner while he waits out near the hospital where Marie's being kept, hoping he can at least get a glimpse of his son and at the very best case scenario, have a chance to apologize. But all he can do is hope. And when the reports come in of Holly White making it back to Albuquerque from New Hampshire, he's able to breathe a sigh of relief that his daughter made it back okay and is currently being held in the same hospital for an evaluation. But the last thing he would have expected was Marie trying to take her own life, which interferes with his plan on leaving Holly in her custody, but it's too late to go back now. And the fact that Junior isn't in a hospital or anywhere to be found, it makes him wonder why his son wouldn't be there. So with it nearly time for him to meet with Jack, Walter makes one last ditch effort to find his son, and he decides to head over to Marie's house. But when he gets there, to his disappointment, Walter Jr. is not there either. And after sneaking into the house, he sees the yellow caution tape that blocks off Marie's room door, making him feel guilty knowing that this was a ripple effect that his actions caused. And as he continues to go down the hall until he gets to Junior's room, it doesn't take Walter too long before finding a baggie of blue sky meth on top of the dresser, and completely shattering Walter's world, because the one thing that he was truly good at, the one thing that he really enjoyed, was the last thing that he would have ever wanted his son to be doing. So as he puts the baggie in his pocket to dispose of later, Walter would leave a letter on Junior's bed basically telling him that he's sorry for everything that happened and how it was never his fault for his mother's death. And if he can just hold on for just a little longer, him and his sister will have everything that they'll ever need. And with a heavy heart, Walter leaves Marie's house no longer proud of the meth empire that he's worked so hard for, but now a man on a mission wanting to put an end to the very thing that he's created. And with the M60 machine gun positioned in his trunk, Walter heads over to Jack's compound ready for whatever comes next. After the shooting stops, Todd is the first person to get up to check and see if the coast is clear. And as he's looking out the window, he doesn't pay attention to Jesse, who's getting ready to pounce on him. And as he looks over to Walter, who's just now standing up, Jesse suddenly attacks him, wrapping his chains around his neck and strangling him until he stops breathing. And after Walter kills Jack, he turns his attention towards Jesse and they have one last moment together as Walter slides the gun over to him. And Jesse quickly picks up the gun and points it at Walter, who tells him in a calm tone, "You want this." But Jesse tells him angrily,
"Say the words! Say you want this! Nothing happens until I hear you say it!"
And as Walter responds saying, "I want this," Jesse takes notice of the gunshot wound to his side. And before Jesse can say anything else, Walter just says to him, "Jesse, please," insisting that he kills him. And as Jesse tightens the grip on his gun, he looks Walter in the eyes and asks him, "Did you really watch Jane die?" And Walter says with his eyes getting watery, "Yes." And Jesse without words grits his teeth in anger, and without warning, he fires, shooting Walter right between the eyes and putting it into Heisenberg himself. He would then drop the gun to make his way over to the black and red El Camino before slamming on the gas and driving away to freedom, never once looking back.
The former Albuquerque schoolteacher, who was the subject of a 6-month international manhunt, was found dead late Tuesday at the scene of a gang massacre which claimed the lives of 9 people.
Early the very next day, news reports start coming in of the drug kingpin Walter White being found at a neo-Nazi compound. And with his daughter Holly White currently at the hospital where Marie's recovering, there's just a matter of knowing where Walter Jr. is, who for the past few days has been at the cemetery and sleeping in his car, mainly just to get away from everything and figure out who he is and who he wants to be. Does he want to be self-destructive like his dad and continue numbing himself with drugs, unable to face reality? Or a protector like his uncle, someone who is good regardless of the odds? And after looking at the headstones of his mom and his uncle, he heads back to his car to get going, figuring that he's been gone long enough. And as he turns on the radio for the first time in days, he hears the news reports on every station about his dad and his sister, and he's so relieved to hear that his sister's okay, and he rushes over to the hospital to see her. And as he holds her while standing in Marie's hospital room, he smiles for the first time in months, now knowing what kind of man that he's gonna be. A protector, like his Uncle Hank. And when making a quick stop at Marie's house to shower and pick up some clothes, Junior notices the letter on his bed. And as he walks closer to the envelope, he sees that it's signed by his father, causing him to start trembling as he feels his heart rate increase. But when he picks up the letter and holds it in his hand, although he's tempted to read it, he instead chooses to ball it up and throw it away. Because for him, there's nothing his father can say that's going to make him forgive or even understand why he did what he did. All he can do is move on from it. So as he gathers the rest of his things and head back over to the hospital, the last thing he does would be to go into his drawer where his pipe and drugs are, and he takes notice of the missing meth that was there before, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. And him holding the pipe in his hand, he thinks for a moment before just dropping it to the ground and letting it shatter on the floor and proving to himself that his father no longer has any type of hold on him. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed another story from the Heisenverse. And I guess when you look at it, this one is more of a Walter Jr. story exploring how he overcomes grief and addiction, and also showing what happened while Walter was on the run but from a different perspective. Because in the original, we only seen Skyler dealing with lawyers and running into Todd, and other than yelling at Walter on the phone, we don't really know what Walter Jr. was up to. Until now. But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of this story? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you enjoy it? Overall thoughts. And more importantly, I want to know what you guys think Walter Jr. was doing while Walter was on the run. Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. Until then, my name is Merge. Later.